Okay, so I would like to start with some kind of criticism to literature so that we can, after the knowledge we got from Mark, we can start thinking about what we read. And I'd like to show you this critical review of what is on literature. This is my disclosure. It's not working. Okay, I will read the disclosure because it is not showing probably. I am independent clinical European advisory board group for the Health Products Regulatory Authority and Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency from United Kingdom. 2017, I had a fund of research from Motiva, 30,000, establishment lab. And 18, I had a research fund of 15,000 from GC Aesthetic. And MQL from Motiva and GC Aesthetic, which are reimbursing only travel and lodgement. Let's see. So we have to look for the truth about BIA-ALCL. And so I was thinking about what Plato said on the apology of Socrates. And that was the thinking of Socrates, how to go for the truth. He said, I know that I know nothing. That was the key point of his thinking in order of searching the truth. And that, of course, it was revolutionary thinking, putting the ignorance as the starting point of, to reach the truth. And that happened by two ways of acting. One was the pars destruens, so the demolition of someone else's conviction. And then there was, obviously, at the same time, the pars construens, which is the construction of new and deeper truths. Let's show you how fragile are our knowledge, how fragile our conviction. Who first described penicillin? We feel quite confident that the one who first described penicillin was Alexander Fleming in London in 1929 and got the Nobel Prize in 1945. Unfortunately, this is not correct. That's a myth because the penicillin was described 34 years before by Vincenzo Tiberio in Naples. Unfortunately, he published in a journal that was not so well known, but he made exactly the studies about the influence of rhizomycetes on schizomycetes. So it was described before. Let's see in BIA-ALCL what we consider that is real, that is reality, and what is myth. There are 7 points we are still discussing and are making confusion. It is a cancer or not. It is spontaneously regress or progress. It's a very, sorry. Let's see. Okay. It's very rare, extremely rare mortality. The risk is acceptable or not. The etiopathogenesis is random or not. Are smooth implant affected too or not? Smooth implant technique or device fault? Are we liable or not? So concerning if it is a cancer or not, there is this interesting publication that talks about the disease as a lymphoproliferative disorder, which is an autonomous, uncontrolled proliferation of lymphoid cells leading to lymphocytosis and or lymphadenopathy, and to involvement of extranodal sites like the bone marrow. But if we look into it, it is a lymphoproliferative disorder because there are 2 types of lymphoproliferative disorder. One is the benign type, non-malignant, which is typically polyclonal, and do not proceed to that. So it has a benign course. and is usually due to infection, like virus, or reactive, like systemic lupus erythematosus. Then there is another lymphoproliferative disorder, which is a malignant one, and is typically monoclonal and may proceed to death. It is an uncontrolled proliferation of a single transformed cell, and these are the lymphoma. Nevertheless, the World Health Organization in 2016 classified the provisional classification of lymphoma in 3 different types: the ALK positive, the ALK negative, and the third new one, which is the breast implant associated type. I think it's that enough to consider a cancer BIA-ALCL. Then there is the point of the spontaneous progression or regression of the disease. It's a paper that was talking about spontaneous regression of the disease, but if we look into the paper, there are 2 months after the primary diagnosis, they took 2 small serum sampling and capsule at surgery, and they found it negative. But we know that 2 small amounts of serum impair sensibility of diagnosis, and number of sampling from the capsule is extremely important because sometimes you have to do more than 90 sampling from the capsule in order to find it. And this is not clarified how many samples they took from the capsule. There are nevertheless no information if the patient from the primary diagnosis to the operation has got any immunomodulative therapy such as steroid. And that's probably the reason why the editor gave a poor level of evidence to such paper, considering this probably not a regression, but they were not able to confirm the diagnosis at the second stage, which is totally different. Because usually that disease progresses, as we know, from inside the serum to the capsule, from the capsule to the extra capsular tissue. And if it is not properly treated, that disease progresses to death. How rare is that tumor? This is the prevalent situation around Europe at the moment. We have some countries which properly report cases and actively report cases, like France, UK, Italy, and then there are some other countries which are a little bit slow, late, like Turkey and Germany. So if we consider the mean prevalence among those countries that properly report the cases, in Europe at the moment we have a prevalence of 1 case every 12,000 women wearing implant of age older than 15 years old. If we report this one, we then consider that at the moment we have 287 histology certified cases around Europe, which we are sure about it, and 11 deaths. If we report the same incidence also to those countries that do not report, like Turkey, which we expect to have 74 cases, but reported only 2, or Germany, which reported 15, but we expect to have 68, then our figures are changing, and we probably have 555 cases around Europe, and we lost probably most of them, we don't know where they are, and the death may raise up to 18. Can we consider still rare such a disease around Europe, according to those figures? Mortality, how rare is that mortality? There was a paper talking about micromort, and then they find what micromort is. 1 micromort is the chance of dying among 1 million chances. And the author claimed that with 12 deaths among 30 million of texture implant patients, the micromort for BIA-ALCL is 0.4, and compared to skiing is ridiculous, because skiing has a micromort of 0.7, and car accident micromort of 1. There are several limitations on that study, because first of all, we saw from FDA updating that the deaths are 33. So nowadays the micromort is no more 0.5, but it's 1.0. And data are continuously changing, so this will increase again. And then skiers and drivers are aware of the risk of death, while not all implanted women knows that if they got an implant, they may die because of a cancer, and that makes a difference. The numerator, the number of deaths for cars or skiing accident are properly registered by police when you have an accident, when they have an accident, of course, while for BIA-ALCL is widely underreported due to mainly unawareness And only recently, in 2016, the WHO defined it as a disease. So we can close the file with that diagnosis. Nevertheless, also denominator, which is the number of women wearing implant, is very confusing in the paper because the author considered only bilateral breast augmentation with texture implant. They did not consider breast reconstruction or unilateral augmentation. That makes the data very unreliable in the calculation. So, nevertheless, we are not looking for a serial killer, or we are talking about mortality. Why do we talk about mortality, which is only the worst outcome of the disease? We are looking for a cancer risk factor. So we have to go back to a cancer risk factor and see how much is the frequency and the prevalence of that phenomenon. So if we look at what the WHO says about how much is a cancer risk factor, how can be acceptable or not a cancer risk factor, and WHO state that the acceptable level is 1 case among 1 million of chances to have a cancer. So if we are at that level, this is acceptable, and we don't need to do any improvement in safety. But if it is above that level, then we need to do something. This is the report of a paper from the board and the group from the Netherlands, and state that the cumulative risk of BIA-ALCL is 29 to 82 chances, about 1 million in the age of the patient between 50 and 70, in patient wearing implants. So are we still in a range of acceptable risk or not? The etiopathogenesis. That's very discussed and interesting. There was an Italian doctor who was promoting such a theory, and he claims that the LCL is due to 4 situations. One is protagonism, and he says that he's a protagonist of 2 Mr. No one coming from Australia and the one coming from United States. And then he says that it's a superficiality, the second factor, because it's much easier to follow the group like lambs than to express their own idea. So everybody followed the group of those 2 protagonists. And then he says that American surgeons are mystifying because they don't know how to use anatomical implant. The final, which is difficult for me to believe, is the competition between industry. So everything came out because of competition between industry, because there was a leader factory on the market, and so that was the fighting. So how can we explain the cascade of events that started in December 18 with the French notified body, the GMET, they didn't renew the CE mark, and then immediately after, on April, 4 months after, the NSM, French Minister of Health, banned macrotexture and polyurethane breast implant surface according to the ISO 2018. And then on May, 1 month after, Health Canada banned BIA-ALCL allergan breast implant and expander, which were the unique texture device on their market. So there is no texture device on the market anymore. And then on July, the FDA required Allergan to recall BIA-ALCL surface implant from the US market. And few hours after, Allergan just withdrew all the BIA-ALCL product from the worldwide market. And that's competition between industry. And TGA confirmed temporarily the ban of polyurethane breast implant and macrotexture, according to ISO 2002. Can we explain that enormous cascade of events in only 7 months just with randomness? Thanks God we have some other professors around the world that give some other theories, which is the importance of genetic mutation. We will see Arianna Di Napoli explain us how much is relevant the genetic mutation, not only as a predisposition, but as an effect after the disease occurring. And that because we can see that 92% of the cases are reported in a white race and only 1 case in a black race. And then we have 1 case in Asiatic population too, in South Korea. And surprisingly, only because 1 case in South Korea, they completely ban all macrotexture implant, only having a single first case. So can genes be the only responsible for such a disease? Of course not. It's part of the game, the genes. One important theory is the biofilm hypothesis. The biofilm hypothesis, a significantly greater proportion of ralstonia were found in the specimen and in the biofilm of BIA-ALCL capsule specimen and were compared to non-tumor contralateral capsule samples. The theory says that there is a chronic gram-negative bacterial antigen stimulation which sustains Th1 and Th17 cell proliferation in capsular tissue and surrounding seromas. And then there is the mutation and the disease. But at the same time, work from the same lab has failed to replicate the ralstonia species data. So we have to abandon the ralstonia. They don't talk about it anymore. And current work from others has refuted that involvement of biofilm, as BIA-ALCL patients do not show a distinct microbiome, as Mark Clemens said before, which is patient-specific and not disease-specific. So the involvement of bacteria is less and less. But to support the bacteria idea, then we have the cluster issue, the cluster that support the biofilm hypothesis. And Peter Cordero studied this patient on 3,500 patients. According to the number needed to harm, which is 7,920, he should expect 0 cases in his sample of patients, but he found 8 cases. So that's a huge cluster. What should we do? Should we ban implant or should we ban Peter Cordero, probably? We should ask FDA to ban Peter Cordero because it's very dangerous for patients. But then, no, we cannot do that because I have a cluster of 9 patients too, but 2 are mine and the 7 other are from someone else. That's a kind of cluster. So I got in my mind what my teacher taught me at school, and I remember the Gospel, Matthew and Luke, which said, ask and you will be given, seek and you will find, knock and you will be open. So probably it's just a problem of biofilm or fate. We should believe in BIA-ALCL or we will never find it. Then we have the tribology hypothesis that Dr. Sorodos will talk about. Tribology is the science that studies the interaction of surfaces in relative motion. So they apparently are stable, but they move themselves, like the capsule and the implant itself. And these are some papers that came out, and the mechanical shear stress, it's very important between those 2 surfaces, because that can induce delamination within the 80 micron above the peaks of the macrotexture surface, and that induced the double capsule. So it's the most important contributing factor of the double capsule formation, and also to the release of the particulate. And we found also in those cases that there is a synovial metaplasia, which is a way that the body defends from that kind of shear stress. So the tribology means that we can have participation of a chronic inflammatory stimulation, which is continuous movement of the surface of the implant, can be one of the factors. The other one, participating to the chronic inflammation too, is the particulate hypothesis. And we'll talk about Dennis Hammond later. So we have the belief that when we put 2 implants in a patient, we range between 1 and 2 4-inch body. Actually, it's not like that. That was an old belief because we could demonstrate that a single implant, for several different reasons, may carry up to 400 microparticulates, which can come from the peaks of salt-loss texture implant. And that can create an extra 4-inch body. Of course, that gives a chronic immunologic inflammatory storm, which we know nothing about it. We always thought about 2 4-inch body. Now we might have 802 4-inch body in a patient, and we don't know what happened at the immunological and inflammatory level. Another issue is, does this disease affect also smooth implant or not? We have to be clear on that because it's very important for patients and for our discipline and for ourselves. So most of the implant were linked, most of the disease were linked to the texture implant, and only a small amount to smooth implant. But different societies, as the American Society of Plastic Surgeons or the American Society of Aesthetic Plastic Surgery, said that there is no link with smooth cases. There is not a single pure case of BIA-ALCL with smooth implant, which means a patient that has implanted only with smooth implant and is got the disease. Doesn't exist. Otherwise, they would publish on literature, very important paper. And finally, the FDA, in its last report, stated in the 26 cases of smooth implant, 12 have unknown prior history of implant, 7 have history of texture implant, and 7 have a history of prior implant with an unknown texture. So there are no report of cases associated with tissue expander. So we have no smooth device-only cases around the world. And can we consider it safe? Epidemiology. It's important. Is the number needed to harm? Let's have a look at epidemiology. So persons needed to be exposed to a risk factor over a specific period to cause harm. And it was studied by the board, and the number needed to harm for BIA-ALCL is 6,920 patients. We need that number of patients to be exposed to any type of implant in order to have the first case of BIA-ALCL. If we look into literature, what's around under our eyes, we see that paper from Pat McGuire. And it's a prospective multicentric study of Allergan 410 silicone gel fill implant patient with a 10 years follow-up. So according to what the board said that the number needed to harm is 6,900, on 17,656 patients, we should expect 3 cases of BIA-ALCL, according to that number. But she found 8 cases. So it's much higher than the number needed to harm, because that one was on all type of implants patient. This one is on a specific type of implant, which is the texture BIA-ALCL implants. So probably the number needed to harm for that kind of implant is 2,200, is no more 7,000. If we look also at other papers, like this one, which is a retrospective course study of prospective collected data from FDA on Allergan natural round silicone gel saline fill implants, with a 10 years follow-up as well. So according to the number needed to harm, on 52,000 smooth patients, we should expect 8 cases, but there are no cases, 0 cases. So the number needed to harm for BIA-ALCL with smooth implant in that paper is infinite number of patients. So you can have as many patients you like, you will never find the first case. So, are smooth safe? This is the question we want to address today. If we can rely safely on smooth. It is then finally a technique or device fault. That's a paper which appeared, and the study is based on the biofilm hypothesis, which is causing BIA-ALCL, and they tried to prove the 14-point plan to prevent the BIA-ALCL. So studying that paper, I noticed that prospective data collection from 21,000 patients with a mean follow-up of 11 years, but the follow-up started 14 years ago, 14 years before. And the only endpoint of the study was BIA-ALCL. So this is more than 21,000 patients with breast implant, and they didn't care about capsular contraction, infection, rupture, nothing, only BIA-ALCL. Then I sent a letter to PRS and I asked, well, how much relevant was BIA-ALCL already in 2003, which is 8 years before 2011 when the FDA gave the alert for the author to run a prospective studies on a single endpoint like BIA-ALCL and not other as capsule contraction, infection, seroma, and their handling. That was the answer I got from authors. Then I gave also a second question, and I asked, were all seroma in 2003, 8 years before the FDA alert, approach a suspect BIA-ALCL, that is cytology, CD30, immunohistochemistry, or some with standard cytology and bacterial screening only, and therefore misdiagnosed but cured by the implant replacement and total capsulectomy, which is possible. That was the answer I got. Well, I didn't understand very much, but then I started to think about it. The 14-point hypothesis. How can we use an hypothesis to demonstrate another hypothesis? Because these are two hypotheses. One is the 14-point, and another one is that the 14-point may reduce the BIA-ALCL. And why I said that? Because to prove the validity of the 14-point plan in reducing bacterial load, we first need to validate it with a randomized control trial. Otherwise, we cannot say that it does reduce biofilm if we don't prove it. It's just an imagination, it's an hypothesis, but we haven't demonstrated. So we have to implant breast implant in the patient according to the 14-point plan, and then explanting and check the biofilm. And then do another group, implanting breast implant prosthesis, not accordingly to 14-point plan, explanting and check the biofilm. If we don't do that, the system of the 14-point is not validated, and it's not wise to use it to demonstrate another hypothesis. It makes no sense. Also because the 14-point plan, if we consider in breast augmentation, that's a kind of good standard of care using intravenous antibiotics. All of us mostly does this, and we can easily implement the other points and to reach the whole 14 points. But if we go into breast reconstruction, we clearly understand that it's impossible not to do atraumatic dissection of the gland. It's impossible not to do not to use the vacuum drainage. It's impossible not to do periareolar incision. So it is not useful, the 14-point plan, in the breast reconstruction. And once again, is a technique or is a device fault? And this is important because then we have to ask ourselves, are we reliable for it or not? Because it's starting the first lawsuit, the Canada class action, United States class action, and the Italy class action started already. And the question is, should we take any responsibility on that issue? It's our responsibility that we behave wrong in the operating theater, or is something else? Thank you for your attention.